Hi, this is Ken Adams, and welcome to 2016 elections with your city candidates for various offices, city council and mayor. And I want to really emphasize again that the primary is when you really need to vote, because that's when these elections are going to be decided. So you need to have your ballots in by May 17th. And joining me today is Warren Bednarz from Ward 7. And actually Warren is a sitting council member currently, an incumbent. And you've been in office since 2013 is when you ran in 2012. Mm-hmm. And I've been asking other candidates, and all of them have not been incumbents, about what made you decide to run for office. And I know it's been a while back, but you probably remember why you wanted to run for office.
Actually, it's something that I live and breathe all day long, and something I've known about for the since I graduated from college over 3 decades ago. And I have a passion for my community. I enjoy volunteering, and I think there's a lot in our community that does the same, or they do the same thing. And you know, this was not just I think I'm going to run for city council. This was going clear back into the early 80s and getting involved with the Northgate Neighborhood Association, getting involved with the Salem Downtown Association, getting involved in when the city council had work that needed to be done and a committee needed to be formed. I remember being asked several times. I was on the Downtown Parking Advisory Board. I chaired the Salem Downtown Strategic Steering Committee, and it was trying to figure out how to make downtown more vital. Adding housing was one of the goals that we obviously talked about. So I've been involved, say, 30 plus years in this, so this is nothing new, and I still have a lot of passion to continue on way beyond the 4 years I've got now.
Well, I'm going to make a statement, is that I met you at the dog park laying out bark for the various paths. And that was long before you ran for election. So I just wanted to let people know that I know that for a fact that Warren has been involved with the community, not just for running for office.
Actually, at the dog park, it was, I worked real hard, pestered the Parks Department, and got the parking lot for the dog park doubled in size. I remember when there wasn't even any bathrooms at the dog park. They were going all into the tree area, and I got the bathrooms that were in there. And then I remember seeing people come in with walkers, and they were walking that long pathway along the street, and I said that wasn't right either, and called and fussed a little bit, and they put in the paved handicap parking that's out towards the entrance.
And that brings up a good point. With citizens, sometimes you just need to keep bugging City Hall, your councilman, to do something about these problems. And don't wait for them to happen. Step up and try to make it happen yourself. You know,
just today I had 2 different emails. People are having issues with either their own personal home, or one of them happens to be a barking dog and needed a connection and couldn't figure out what to do, where to go to get answers. And I was able to connect him. I know it's not a nuisance issue. It's actually a police issue. It's one where the police officer has to witness the dog barking for more than 15 minutes. Then they'll issue a ticket, obviously the first time, and the best thing to do is to have a conversation with the owner first to see if something could be done. But it's that making sure that I can connect if you have a problem, and that's why people come directly to me.
So I've been talking to all the candidates about infrastructure, and we've got some big issues in front of us. We've got the police facility, and so there's a lot of discussion about, is it too big, is it not big enough? And we've been going around about that, but now we have a location. And so what is your view on the police facility? What do you want to see happen?
Well, if you're fortunate, because I was on the Blue Ribbon Task Force that studied this for so many months prior to it being turned over to the City Council. So I'm up on the issue of that, as well as obviously being on City Council and having to make the discussions. We spent 3 3/4 hours, I think, this last work session discussing the police facility. And there's a lot of questions to still be asked and answered. And we asked staff to come back with some of those answers. And I'm concerned, $84 million, I think, is what the proposal is. It's a lot of money. But I'm also concerned that if we underbuild our facility because we're trying to cut edges, that we're going to underserve our community. And one of the questions, as an example, if we eliminate the 911 center, that'll save a lot of money, some people say, and it might. But what I wanted to know, we're renting that space now at the whim of a landlord in a facility that is not secure from terrorists. You could drive a vehicle in through a window or go next to the 911 center and with a bomb and blow it up. A lot less secure than it would be if we put it into a new police facility. And I think it's something we need to take a look at. So I've asked staff in that case, let's do a cost-benefit analysis of if we continue to rent, what's it going to cost us, and if we take that same money and put it into a new 911 center within the police facility, how long would it take to pay it off? So there's all these little things, moving parts in this, that we have to take a look at.
One of the so that kind of discusses the issue about size, but one of the things I like to point out to folks is that Kaiser has a larger police station than the current Salem police station, and they have a fifth of the police officers. And if you multiplied the size of the Kaiser police station by 5, you would get 140,000 square feet.
Good point.
And that is close to what is being recommended. I believe the recommendation was 148,000.
It is.
You said to move it up to 150. But you know, I'm trying to make sure that people understand what we're talking about.
You've got roughly 28,000 square feet of existing police facility right now, with another 20,000 of lease space outside of City Hall. I mean, that's part of the savings. If you don't have to lease it, you can put the money back into the payment on the bonds. But there's been a proposal that to spend $30 million on a police facility and $20,000 on seismic upgrades. $30 million wouldn't even build you the size of the facility that they're currently housing. It would be smaller. That's what the experts have told us. I again come back with this. I am concerned that by cutting corners here that we're going to be underserving the police station in the long run.
But it's going to be a tough issue to get the bond passed.
I agree. Absolutely. It's going to take some educating. City Council is going to have to show, and staff is going to have to show the public, and they're going to have to get the message out and answer people's concerns and questions. I mean, nobody wants to build a Taj Mahal. And oh, by the way, I was just there, and the Taj Mahal is not a very functional building. It's beautiful, but
it's
anyway.
rather small, actually, isn't it?
No, it's quite large. Yeah, it's beautiful, but that's not what we're looking for. We're not looking for gold-plated anything. We're looking for something where the police can function for the next 40 years. And what we have right now, as you said, you have toured the facility as well as I have. Police officers are on top of each other. Evidence is, I mean, it's in a room, but it's packed to the gills.
Well, one of the interesting things I found out recently is that the crime lab is a little over 6 miles from the police station, so it has to be transported back and forth.
Absolutely. It's out at the Willow Lake treatment plant.
Which is not a good practice.
Well, it's the option that we had. So
well, yeah, no, it's the option you've got.
Well, the holding cells. We don't even have holding cells in our city hall. We do have places for people to question, but if you have, unlike like Kaiser has places, if you're trying to get somebody for detox, you can get them in. There's an actual place where you can handcuff them and hold them. Our holding cell that we have in there, I think one has evidence, and I think the other one has armaments in it, the bullets, armaments.
Well, usually they have to take them over to the jail.
Well, that's the solution that they came up with.
Yeah.
If they eliminate it here, we don't need it. We'll just take it directly to Marion County.
Yeah. I don't think any other comment needs to be. The other kind of large infrastructure issue, and this is one I discussed in 2014 with a number of candidates, and that is the third bridge. So what is your view on the third bridge?
Well, there again, I've got about 10 years into the most recent stab at trying to get a third bridge into our community. I do support the third bridge. I've got some unique or some ideas just because I think the community is struggling with, it's a local bridge and it should be, you know, west side to east side, and when we terminate at either side, it should be right angle turns. I'm looking at this as both a local bridge and a regional bridge, and it's the reason that we talked about putting the bridge up north in the first place is because the engineers said that most of the traffic is between Portland and the coast. And I'm looking at this where I'm trying to get the bridge connected into the Parkway and connected into Highway 22, because once you get connected into a state highway, 22, or a federal highway, I-5, you get state and federal funds. And the cost of this bridge will not be borne just by the citizens of this community itself. It'll be spread out. I have no doubt that Salem's going to have a fairly large bond measure when that comes up, but I'm pretty sure that they're not going to have to pay all the fee to get that third bridge in.
Yeah, well, I went to several of those work sessions, and there was no talk about state or federal funds. You know, that was, and I'm going, wait a minute, this is a big deal, not to get, you know, the whole thing's going to be on the city of Salem and Marion County.
They held a vignette where we had the ability to adjust registration costs. You could put some money onto the registration, or a gas tax, or property tax, and you could
toll.
Or a toll, and so we put in little groups, and you could sit there and play and adjust, and in the end, we all gave our reports. And I found it rather interesting at that point. It was, Dan Clem and it was Rich Clausen, and both of them, the only two sitting councilors at that time, were in this thing. And it was funny because they said, we can't do it with the tools that you've given us, because the reality is there's going to be outside funding. There's going to be federal funding for a project of this size and magnitude. And that was the experience of people who've been sitting on city council, knowing full well, I mean, we just widened Kubler between, you know, what was it, Sunnyview and Commercial Street. We're going to continue widening it further down, but the point is, that last widening, we had federal funds for it, even though it was a city project. So the reality is you're likely to get some federal funding on this.
But that's the holdup right now, is getting that funding.
Actually, the holdup in my mind is you have to go through the process. You have to go through the process of the environmental impact statement before you can ask for the funds. And everybody's been saying, well, don't you have to identify? That's part of the process. We have identified in general, but not in specific. So once the EIS gets finished, then you can go after the funding.
Well, I made a calculation in the workshop about how much the toll would have to be to pay for it.
So you were there? That's right, you were there, okay.
$10 each way, if it was just on the toll. And then the problem, I think, is also aren't the bridges part of Highway 22? So that's a state facility. It's not like we can go out and put a toll on it.
Well, that's right. But you're going to have to toll those two bridges if you're going to toll the new bridge.
Because then nobody would take
Nobody would use it. Or there may be some that would use it, but some wouldn't. But frankly, I mean, we're getting freight trucks that go through downtown Salem. It's just not the way traffic should be handled in a community of this size. Maybe 20 years ago, but we need to do something. And I'm a firm believer. I know people say, oh, it's just an 8 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the evening issue, but it really isn't. It's freight mobility. It's traffic throughout the whole day. It is just in case something else happens to those existing bridges, whether it's seismic or whether it's somebody who's going to jump off. We need alternatives. I've been talking about the bridges that have the railroad out on River Road South. That needs to be on the contingency plan of repairs that need to be done. They need to lower the roads so some trucks can get through those underpasses.
We've had some problems in that area.
You know what? I just barely got into office, and I had 3 different instances where I brought pictures into City Council showing trucks being squished underneath the railroad tracks.
Also, from what I remember, it's going to be about 30 plus years before the state is going to retrofit the 2 bridges we have, which brings up your point about having some way to get across. But it seems like maybe the city should be putting some emphasis on trying to get that done earlier, since that's a major way of getting across the Willamette at this point.
I have no doubt that the staff has been pushing it. It's probably a matter of money, federal money, and that would be my guess on that at this point.
Yeah. One of the other issues, and I know you've been involved in this, is the homeless situation, but also affordable housing. And there was a case in front of the city council a couple of months ago when they were trying to get a variance on some property down on Liberty, and I think it was Sunnyview.
I'm glad you brought it up, because I was actually thinking of that as a good example of, okay, so we had to do, the city is required every 10 years to do a housing needs analysis. And that is required by the federal government to figure out, I might be getting into the weeds here. As I said, I know too much about things. But it did say that we're about 2,900 apartment unit short of what we should have in the next 20 years in our community. When you have a lack of housing, supply and demand, the rents go up, and it makes it unaffordable for people to get a place to. So that particular development out south was proposed. The neighbors did not like it because it abuts up into single-family residence.
And these were like 2 and 3 story.
These were all 3-story.
On one side, I thought it was.
No, it was all 3-story all the way around. And the solution that I proposed and that I had asked was, what if you knock the units that are closest to the single-family residence down to 2 stories? And they agreed to that. They also agreed to put in a taller fence. They also agreed to put in evergreen trees so that it would be site obscuring, so people wouldn't look down from the apartments into the backyard of these single-family residences.
Yeah, I guess the problem that bothered me about that was these were kind of high-end apartments. And I think the city should be encouraging people to, when they have these larger projects, to at least have some set aside for affordable housing. And maybe we give them a break on those units or whatever. But it seems like we have been building a lot of condos downtown, and they're high-end. There's not the affordable housing so much downtown.
Well, it's interesting. I see it as a in the pipeline kind of thing. The homeless people, which we're going to talk about in a second, have no place to go once they get into the housing market, because the low-end housing is filled. And the low-end housing is filled because there's no place to go in the middle housing. And the middle housing has no place to go until they can, everybody needs to move up and open up some of that poor, less expensive, affordable housing that's out there.
But we're approximately 6,000 units?
No, 2,900 units.
But, okay.
In the next 20 years.
Okay. But this is, what can the city do as far as like affordable housing? And then we'll get into the homeless.
Okay, so the city can do several things, one of which we need to discuss as a community. Do we want to have apartments in our neighborhoods or near our neighborhoods? And there's this real serious conversation or discussion coming back saying, yes, we do, but not in my neighborhood. So I think there's that certain amount of coming to terms with well, what do we mean about solving this problem with not having enough housing? The city itself, the city council, the city staff can come up with rules that might help things. As an example, allowing duplexes or triplexes in single family resident zoned properties. It can do something. We don't allow lot sizes smaller than 4,000 square feet. And when you have this tiny house nation coming through, we don't allow tiny houses. We don't allow mother-in-law flats, the ones where you have the addition of another house behind the home that you already have. I had an instance up in Candelaria where an individual, they took their land, they infilled the land by building another house to it, and their neighbors got upset and then came to me. And he had a perfect right to do what he was doing. I mean, the system is set up for that, but it's getting higher density in some of our existing residential neighborhoods. And that upsets people when they move in, they're accustomed to a certain lay of the land, and it doesn't always remain that way. And that's a tough discussion that the community has to have. But there's certainly rules that the city council can deal with that might help the situation.
So let's talk about homeless. And you brought up a good point. Do we need to keep studying this issue? What action are we going to be taking? And I think we've got a crisis. We need to start doing stuff. And I mean, study is good. You need to do study to figure out, but I mean, we've got a crisis.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
Okay, so you've made that statement. What do you want to see done?
Well, first thing, I'm very much of a supporter of being educated. As a public official, I took it upon myself actually before I became a public official, but we've been volunteering with Marion Polk Food Share. I'm on the board of directors there to see what I can do to learn. I've not been hungry. Let's just put it this way. And I don't understand it. And so that's one of the reasons why I got involved years ago with them, to figure out, well, why are people hungry? And what can we do in addition to feeding people? We need to educate them. Well, this all leads into the homeless issue as well. I took it upon myself to do the homeless count in the last couple of years. It is a fantastic time to learn about people and why they choose or not choose to be homeless. We go to the camps and you take the time, you usually bring them something like some food or something, but you listen to their stories, and it is fascinating to hear that they're here. You could tell some of them were mentally all there. You could tell others that said, I like my community and my tent, and I lose that if I go to Union Gospel and I have to follow rules there. There's a multitude of things that why people are homeless.
I heard a story that from this gentleman who said he didn't want to be at Union Gospel because there were too many ex-cons there and he didn't feel safe.
I've heard the same thing. Honestly, I've heard the same thing. Do you have a husband and wife or a boyfriend, girlfriend, and they've got a dog? They can't take that. They've got a grocery cart with all their stuff. Union Gospel will secure your belongings once you're inside the building, but they don't take grocery carts full. We ran into people that one lost his green card. They just needs help getting his green card. Another one doesn't have his driver's license, lost it as well. And the point with those is you can't get work without having either a green card or a driver's license.
Well, this gentleman asked me to hold his backpack, and this was during the rainy season because his important paperwork in there, and he doesn't, always have a place to sleep, at Union Gospel like that, because you have to get in by a certain time, and he does have a wife, so he tries to make sure that she's taken care of before he wanders over to Union Gospel to try to see if he's got a place. And so I said, yeah, I'll take your backpack, but I mean, that's something that most people don't think about.
They don't think about it.
And like, I've known in other places where I've lived, I've known some homeless folks, and just what it takes to survive, to get food, to get shelter, takes you all day.
What I learned on talking to people is food is an issue with homeless, but it's not the issue that's front and center, because there's a lot of people out there that are willing to give the food away. I mean, Marion Polk Food Share has over 100 pantries that it gives food to, and those pantries then in turn give them out. So I mean, there's food is available mostly, because there are exceptions to that rule. It's all the other little support services that need to go in to get people off the street. So when people talk about housing first has been touted quite a bit, just put them in a house. That ends homelessness. What they're not telling is the rest of the story, and the rest of the story is you've got to get wraparound services. You've got to get mental health or drug or there's not even a class, there used to be, not even a class anymore on how to be a renter. So if you've struggled to be as a renter and you've had an eviction or something, there used to be a class out there that taught you how to basically be a tenant, a decent tenant. And I'd like to see that return. Or as long as it works. I mean, I don't want to return something that isn't working, but if it really does work, I think it makes sense to help people get back into housing.
This issue coming up that I'm going to talk about, and that is pedestrian bike safety. And I'd also kind of like to join that with adequate transportation, because that's another thing too with the homeless. If you're looking for a job and the buses stop early evening, there's no bus service on the weekends, that creates a big problem for them to try to get someplace and apply for jobs. And it just adds another layer of problems. But the bike and pedestrian safety, we've had 10 pedestrian deaths in about the last year plus. Too many. Yeah. And I always complain about certain intersections that people are afraid to step out. I mean, if you've got a stroller or young kids, you don't want to step out in that street because the cars show no indication of stopping.
Right. I absolutely agree with you that we've got to do something. And I've been looking at what little I know about it, because I'm not involved in those accidents, but I think we need to take and make sure that we have mutual responsibility, that drivers are watching out for people, and they're not driving drunk, they're not driving distracted, whether it's texting or whatever they're doing. But there's a mutual response. That driver has a responsibility when they're behind a 6,000-pound vehicle, they're driving down a road, they have a responsibility to be a driver first and not eat their breakfast second. On the same side, as a pedestrian, we have to make sure that our pedestrians, and I know quite a few of these people who have died in the last year, have actually done the right thing. They've been in crosswalks, they've been in marked spaces. I just still think it's the same thing where we need to take mutual responsibility, so we keep our eyes out, look for the whites of the eyes of the driver kind of thing. Unless you're blind, and then we're going to have to figure out something else.
One of the intersections I talked to you a lot about, a person was injured, and he was visually impaired. And he used to walk by 2-3 times a day, and I haven't seen him walking since then. I
don't know if I really have an answer in all of that. I think the city could do better on some of the marking of the crosswalks. You and I talked about an instance up at Chemeketa and 17th as an example, and this is one of those places where you've had multiple instances at that location. Nobody's been killed at this point, but multiple instances of people trying to get across 17th Street, cars won't stop. One of the things that has worked rather well in our community has been the flashing yellow lights. We have one over here on 12th Street. We have another one over here on Commercial. Now here's an example. You talked to city staff. City staff said, well, we're not going to put one in, even though it's a problem over there. We're not going to put one in because it's not multiple lanes going in the same direction. So, you know, this is one of those places where you come to somebody like me or the person in your ward or the mayor or whomever, but you come to me and you say, this isn't right. We still have a problem. There's a silly rule out there that somebody's made, and we need to take a look at, have a very serious look at this rule.
Well, see, I'm going to take your advice about the squeaky wheel, and you're going to be seeing me a lot at city councils bringing this very information up time after time until I see some improvement.
Come
frankly.
on down.
I will.
You couldn't be any worse than Ron Sturba that's there every week about streetlights. He's there. He's been there for the last 2 years. He's there nearly every meeting. And by the way, you know, this is every meeting that the city council holds is a public record. It's on a calendar. It's always out there. People are saying, I can't get in. The city is really closed and what we listen to. Every meeting we have is a public record except for executive sessions, which are usually contract and real estate negotiations.
And usually if you want to speak to something that isn't on the agenda, you get to do that toward the beginning of the meeting.
It's actually at the end of the meeting that you talk. It's the one at the beginning that's everything except for public hearings.
Okay.
And that rule gets waived every once in a while. We've had important issues to the community, and we have a room full of people. We have waived the rule that we'll do it at the end, and we put everything up in the front end, so people don't have to sit there for the 3 hours, 3.5 hours that the rest of us are there for.
So, you know, we've talked about issues that, you know, I think are important to the community. So are there some other issues that we haven't mentioned that you'd like to bring up at this point? We've got a couple of minutes left.
Okay, well, I mean, there are things that can be facing this community, such as the North Campus. We're talking about the State Hospital on Center Street, Park Avenue. That land does not belong to the city of Salem. It belongs to the state of Oregon. And I know everybody has, but we want to use it for this. We want to have control over that. And
it's a beautiful campus.
It is. And you know, the Dome building will stay. And it looks like there's been enough vocal outreach that I'm not saying that it is, but that it looks like we may have a park on the north side facing onto D Street. But we have the remainder of that land. I know one thing. Whatever happens there, I want to get the property back on the tax rolls, because we have almost a quarter of our land in the city of Salem is off the tax rolls because we have so many governmental agencies here.
State.
Well, county, city, and then you got the nonprofits, and I'm not blaming the nonprofits and schools and so forth, but it does mean that the rest of us have to shoulder the burden of paying the taxes in this community. If we can get something like that back onto the tax rolls, that would be a great thing. I'm guessing, my guess is that whatever the state goes with, it's going to be probably residential with some probably mixed use. Mixed use meaning that it's probably going to be some retail. Part of that is if people don't have to leave their neighborhood to get whatever it is that they want. The groceries is an example. You know, it saves on transportation. Yeah,
and it is a distance to a grocery store up there at that corner.
You know, I quoted that as a food desert on a radio show a couple days ago. Then I saw somebody got mad at me. Really? It's a food desert when Lancaster's? I didn't make that up. It was something that was given to me somewhere along the way, and I think it's relative to the grocery stores, not so much restaurants.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is I think up on Lancaster and Center, there's an IGA up there, but it's a ways away if you're
walking. It's a long distance. Yeah. I mean, you've got Safeway down there at 12th and Center Streets, but that's kind of a hike as well.
Yes.
So you're then
and you've got to cross 17th Street.
Or Center in some cases, you know, but I mean, it is kind of a long way.
It is.
And I mean, not everybody has cars.
That is. Other things that I wanted to talk about was, and I didn't bring it up in relative to the police station, but it goes in line with things like parks bonding, other bonding projects that we might have out there, whether it's the seismic.
Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, Warren, but we're out of time. But I do want to thank you for coming down and discussing these issues, and thank you very much. And come back next time for 2016 elections. Thank you.